Metropolitan Chicago is one of the most religiously diverse areas in the world, and for more than a half century, Sanctuary has reported and reflected on our faith-filled community. Sanctuary tells stories of faith from both inside our houses of worship to the streets and neighborhoods where faith is acted out every day with acts of kindness and concern. From food pantries to peace initiatives, from worship services to servicing the poor, Sanctuary has a proud history of reporting on the goodness that flows from our faith traditions. Watch Sanctuary every Sunday at 12 noon.
Ahead on Sanctuary, faith in the age of AI.
Welcome to Sanctuary, bringing you conversation and stories at the intersection of life and faith. This edition of Sanctuary is produced in cooperation with the Council of Religious Leaders of Metropolitan Chicago.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Sanctuary. I'm your host, Shayda Safapour, an executive board member of the Council of Religious Leaders of Metropolitan Chicago. Today, we gather at a truly historic moment for the global faith community. We step into one of the most extraordinary frontiers of our time, the meeting place of technology and the soul. Artificial intelligence is reshaping our world, how we think, create, and even connect with one another. But as we marvel at its power, a deeper question emerges. What does it mean to be human in the age of AI? And beyond knowledge, beyond algorithms and data, lies another question. Can a machine ever hold wisdom? Can it guide the spirit? Our interfaith panel will help us search for meaning in this new digital dawn, where humanity and technology meet, and where spirit must still lead the way. Joining us today is Dr. Elías Ortega, President and Professor of Religion, Ethics, and Leadership at Meadville, Lombard. Holding a PhD in Religion and Society from Princeton, Dr. Ortega draws on decades of scholarship in cultural ethics, leadership, and social justice to provide a nuanced perspective on how faith traditions engage with societal transformation and emerging technologies. We are also pleased to welcome Dr. Syed Atif Rizwan, Assistant Professor of Islamic and Interreligious Studies and Director of the Catholic Muslim Studies Program at the Catholic Theological Union. With a PhD in Islamic Studies from UCLA, Dr. Rizwan's interests include the history of Islamic law and jurisprudence, as well as interreligious dialogue and studies. So join us as we reflect, question, and seek insight across faiths on this vital conversation about what guides the spirit in a digital age. Welcome to Sanctuary, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation.
Well, I will start with a few questions that will hopefully be answered by both of you based on your academic scholarship, experience, and exposures. And feel free to work off each other's responses, and I may jump in at times too. But again, we are just so thrilled to have you. So I'll start with you, Elías. Many of the spiritual traditions emphasize wisdom and reflection and contemplation. How might these AI tools influence or reshape these practices, both positively or negatively, in the way communities right now nurture spiritual insight?
Mm-hmm. So the question for me is interesting for a number of reasons, right? First, technologies of different sorts have always been impacted how we interact with religious texts, sacred texts and traditions. So one of the biggest revolution, particularly among the Christian community, was the press, right? So once the Bible becomes printed, it can be reproduced in multiple ways very, very quickly, which means that more people have access to it. It also had the impact of increasing literacy, right, across a broader population of peasants that then understand and start making the sacred scripture itself, reading them for themselves and interpreting for themselves. And that also creates a particular layer of conflicts, right, with religious authorities and interpreters who spend times, decades, studying, reflecting, meditating with sacred texts. So for me, that's one example. We can think about oral traditions in traditional African thought, right, in which the religious corpus is memorized, right, and there are particular ways in which that oral tradition gets imparted to other practitioners. But there's a particular role in which whatever the text is not a written text as much as an oral text. It's in the heart, it is in the mind, to be then reinterpreted and make anew to a new community. So when I think about AI, I want to start in the positive side, right, of a conversation, something that I think may be of value. And one of them is that it could be a bit of a codex that can put multiple sacred texts, right, in the hands of a broader audience to be able to think through and curate information in a particular way that makes it somewhat more accessible, right, for folks to experience, right, the text firsthand, so to speak. In the more challenging side is that mediation happens through a curation that is not a religious practitioner, right? It is not someone who has spent time cultivating, right, the spirit, cultivating wisdom in community, in relationship to other teachers, inheriting a tradition from their teachers and their teachers' teachers, and then they are traditioning forward, right, through the practice of being together in community. So for me, that could be some of the drawbacks, right? The expectation, right, that this really a tool that we prompt to receive some answers, right, and see some information, take the place of a trusted teacher, right, or a mentor. And for me, that's part of that dynamic that we are seeing in some time happening. The other thing that I think is also another positive is the ability to do some translation, right? To curate in multiple language access to information that otherwise may be not only limited but also expensive, right? To have quick access to. So that can be a positive. In some of my own interfaith work in global communities, we have noticed that under the sign of colonialism and empire, English is the more common currency, right, if we want to be in interfaith dialogue, unfortunately. But sometimes with AI tools, there have been moments in which we have been able to do some work and say, let's say particular white papers that we may be working together to have others quick translation, right, that we can use in community. And yet, on the other side, we're thinking about the environmental impact. What does it mean to rely on tools that consume significant amount of energy and water resources in the world? So I think there's some moments there of discernment, right? That we are still in the excitement of the new shiny technology, but we need to start entering the deeper discernment of what is the broader impact in our communities.
Thank you. And Syed, I'd love to hear your perspective as well. I mean, I think what Elías has mentioned makes so much sense, that a fact that we have greater accessibility, ability to have translations of these very old and sacred texts. What has been your experience? More positive, more negative, a little bit of both, in terms of how the communities can actually practice their reflection and contemplation, being that's our tradition of how we are spiritual.
Thank you so much for the question. I think what Elías has said a lot is what I would echo, and I would add that, I would affirm that there are both positives and negatives with AI. And the positives is that, one of the positives, yes, it gives the ability to access information very quickly. And so that's always helpful. Sometimes it does get things wrong. And that's something I tell my students, is that don't just look to a large language model to help you do your research, or cite something that the LLM says is, citable, because it may be wrong. And that happens. So it's actually a good way to catch those students who are using AI without disclosing it fully, right? So there are errors that the LLM can make, and so that's one of the challenges. The other is that, at least within the English-speaking LLMs, what it's accessing is predominantly North American, Western European works. And those works are oftentimes, particularly when it comes to, say, a religion like Islam, tend to have colonial language in them and colonial frameworks that, construct a particular group, whether it be religious or a ethnic group, in a certain way that, for lack of better terms, can be, biased in a negative way. And so accessing information, let's say, about Muslims through a LLM that has been, let's say, that has been generated in the US, for example, it's going to perhaps gives results that can be problematic. In fact, there's research been done, and this research has demonstrated that LLM models tend to portray Islam and Muslims in a very bigoted way. And so, it's sometimes it's not necessarily because those who are constructing the model are bigoted. Perhaps they are explicitly, but the language that's being used in certain ways to describe Muslims or Islam as objects, or even an ethnic group, can have within it its own discursive history in the words that are biased. And so therefore, if the material it's accessing is constructed in that way, then that's what the language large model is going to do. And that's one of the biggest dangers right now, is that, if someone isn't aware of this, then they can come away thinking that, well, Islam is a religion of violence, whereas Christianity is a religion of peace. Right? And because of the way that in public discourse especially, but even in the academy in many ways, Islam or Muslims are portrayed. And so that's one of my concerns, and certainly large LLMs or LLMs, large language models, can also learn. So there's ways in which to also push back on them, which helps, and they can and that can help. And part of the challenge is that the LLMs don't have access to everything that's out there. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of Islamic manuscripts that haven't been even put into legible documents, let alone online, and it doesn't have access to those. So when you ask a question about, or when you prompt, questions about like wisdom, the LLM may not understand the many ways that, let's say, Chinese philosophy understands wisdom, or a group in, let's say, the south of Sudan understands what wisdom is and how that's been written or even talked about orally, right? Or in Puerto Rico, for example, what wisdom can mean, and they may not be exactly like what we think of immediately when we say the word wisdom. And so those kind of things are all, missing right now. Maybe in the future it'll change, but it's missing right now. And if people access LLMs thinking that, well, they're going to get the full picture right now, that's going to be quote unquote objective, it's not.
It's not going to happen.
This is tremendously useful, and I think, again, it's reminding ourselves and our audience that this is a tool. It is not an answer, and I think that hopefully that perspective that I can gather data but not have the entire picture, entire feel for a religion, that's just the reality of, again, where we are right now, and then being warned that we may not always get the most accurate information. But it sure is an efficient way, I think, to access things that we may not be able to otherwise be able to find. Thank you both for answering this question. We have many more. We're going to take a break and continue our conversation with our guests. We'll be right back.
Metropolitan Chicago is one of the most religiously diverse areas in the world, and for more than a half-century, Sanctuary has reported and reflected on our faith-filled community. Sanctuary tells stories of faith from both inside our houses of worship to the streets and neighborhoods where faith is acted out every day with acts of kindness and concern. From food pantries to peace initiatives, from worship services to servicing the poor, Sanctuary has a proud history of reporting on the goodness that flows from our faith traditions. Watch Sanctuary every Sunday at 12 noon.
Welcome back to Sanctuary. I'm Shayda Safapour, and we are talking about the significance and impact of AI on spirituality. Syed, I'd like to start with you, and I'll pose the same question to Elías. Prayer is so central to everyone's faith. My faith, the Bahá'í faith, the Islamic faith, the Christian faith, there's no faith that doesn't advocate for prayer and that spiritual, intimate, special communion with God. Prayer is often about intention and surrender. Qualities that don't come easy to a machine like ChatGPT. So can AI ever play a meaningful role in prayer or your spiritual practice? Or does it involve, is there some sort of risk that it might reduce the sacred and that simulation that we traditionally get from prayer?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So for Muslims, as many would know, that Muslims, those who wish to pray, there's 5 canonical prayers throughout the day. And in addition to them serving as a way to remind oneself of God, it is also a way to be thankful and to be grateful to God and for God's blessings. Now, if a person is going to interact with a large language model simulation and interact with it in terms of where that can help them in their prayer, I'm really not sure. I mean, I don't, prayer is a active experience, right? And as such, how a human being can get something similar from an LLM, I think it has to be determined. I don't see myself reorienting towards ChatGPT, for example, for prayer. Now, can ChatGPT offer insights into ways of thinking about one's religious tradition or one's tradition that could help with prayer? Possibly. Because I'm teaching students, I'm also trying to think as a student, okay, what kind of questions can I ask the large language model, and what kind of responses do I get? And sometimes, so I do that, and sometimes, oh, this is pretty good, like it's not actually bad. And other times, like I can see how this response is based on the information that's only available to it versus what a human experience brings to the table, or its inability to access text, for example, that it can't translate for itself, or just doesn't have the ability to do because they're in hard copy or they're in manuscript for example. And so I do think there's a disconnect. And as I said before, for now, where it goes in the future, I don't know. But I think right now it's very, it's very hard for me to see how it can be a source for helping one's connection to God in the way an actual prayer itself can.
Right. Thank you. Elías, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think for me it is complicated, right? And part of the complexity for me has to do with the reality that whatever the learning language model is, it is a tool, and as a tool, it has no agency, which means that attributing agency to a tool that we use is already problematic, right? Because we are in essence putting our own agency on pause and assuming the authority that others will tell us exactly and guide us what to do. Second, as a tool, any kind of language model requires a particular kinds of know-how into how to prompt the system itself to be able to produce some quality responses. And then in turn, that also requires enough information literacy, right, from the user to know whether or not that is correct or not. So I think I'm using that as a lead way to say ChatGPT did not go to seminary, right? Or to any other religious order or practice to spend time in meaning time in information, right? Talking to your colleagues, to your peers, to alums, to mentors, to your faculty members, processing together, right, the grief that you may carry that requires a particular kind of lamenting prayer that you spend. It doesn't have the experience of the difference between a communal prayer, right, than a religious leader pray for us, right? I'm thinking about the call to prayer, right? For me, it will be a reminder to say it is time for us to gather, to come together, right, as a community, to then enter into our prayers, right? ChatGPT cannot do that, right? For you. But can can I produce with the right prompting some outline of a possible prayer that you could use to guide a community if you are kind of lost for words? Maybe, right? Maybe. But I think what is missing from there is the real agency of the individual and the community connecting to spirit, what is inside, what is grounded, right, in the community, to then lift that up to, you know, the God of the understanding, or the earth, or spirit, right? ChatGPT cannot do that for you. An experience that I remember recently, I went to a small chapel in Prague, and I remember when I come in feeling, it's like, wow, there's been mothers here praying for their children for centuries. And you can feel the affect, right, in some of those holy spaces. That is like, praying here will be very, very different than praying in front of my computer.
Absolutely.
Right, at home.
Absolutely.
So I think that, again, that community is important. And the last thing that I would say, and I think this is maybe something for religious communities to think about, that part of the turning to technology as a tool to get some of that formation is because we may not oftentimes be spending time informing our communities. Like, you just do not pray, like you are taught to pray. Right, you just spend time around the table and saying grace, right? Or you know, other communities. I know in one of my faith communities, we are learned to say some prayers in a particular way, in a particular order, and there's reasons to that, and then that mark an experience, right? That then you can expand, but without having that guidance, it is likely that you maybe start a process of curiosity, maybe, that will hopefully then lead you to be in broader community, to seek community, right, to seek others that you can then practice in prayer.
I love these. They're such profound points and insights, because I think we often see prayer as just as a unilateral action. We forget that it's actually a more holistic approach, and it really it's meant to bring you into oneness with the community, with your environment, and to sort of maybe heighten your senses and heighten your consciousness, which again is a bit tricky with a machine. So I appreciate that.
And if I can add something too, I think actually 2 points, if that's okay. One is what you're talking about, like the aesthetics of praying, that the AI can't really understand. I think that's you're absolutely right. You know, when I was in Cordoba, for example, and standing in the church mosque, right, and thinking about what that was, you know, in Al-Andalus, for example, and what it meant, it was quite remarkable, right? Or as, you know,
you don't have that in the New World.
right. Or the idea that you know, listening to the Quran, and what that means spiritually, and then obviously being at Catholic Theological Union and attending Mass, listening to the hymns, and during prayer Mass, you know, and what that means spiritually. I mean, those things, I think sometimes could get lost with AI. And of course, then AI is also mirroring what we do, right? One thing I always I talk about is that, you know, the most recurring concept in the Quran is the unicity or the uniqueness of God, and the second most recurring concept is justice. And so practicing justice is a form of prayer, right? Because it's acknowledging the vertical and the horizontal coming together. I'm not sure if a large language model can really get there, right? And if somebody's looking for spiritual fulfillment and a large language model says, well, you need to pray, if it misses the idea, well, maybe you can get spiritual fulfillment by helping community members,
right?
By you know, being in solidarity with those who may be that are marginalized, and that be a way of spiritual renewal or feeding in a way.
I like that.
Where does that go, right? Where does that go in this interaction with the AI? Right?
Actually, the feeding part reminds me that oftentimes in prayer you ask for prayer. Right, ChatGPT cannot pray for you. Right. Or, and I'm thinking when someone is praying for you, it is a trilateral relationship, right? It's not my authority, let's say, giving a blessing. You know, I do it in the name of. I'm thinking about the liturgical blessing in Numbers, right? May Adonai bless you, right? May Adonai keep you and give you peace, right? It's not upon my name; it's upon the name of someone greater. But that puts me in relationship to the person that I'm blessing, and in relationship with the divine, LMS do not have those relationships of accountability. Right.
Gentlemen, I would love to wrap up, and we have a couple more minutes with one final question. I know you touched on agency a few times, and I think this is a great way to kind of bring this all together. Both of your works have explored ethics and leadership in times of social change. From your perspective, how does AI challenge or reshape our sense of human agency? The very idea that spiritual growth depends on conscious choices. How is AI going to shape or reshape our spiritual growth if there are machines making choices for us rather than our agencies? Either one of you,
Yeah,
Syed, if
sure.
you'd like to jump in.
Yes, I mean, I think that it is going to be a challenge, at least, thinking about it at a very surface level, because what's interesting between large language models and, say, something like a Google search is that the Google search, when you put in words, it will only look for data that matches those words, whereas a large language model will infer certain things from those words and then give you even more data, right? And so it learns in a sense. That's why it's called a large. It's learning in that way, and so it is able to do kind of the heavy lifting that we would sometimes do for ourselves, which is needed for our own growth.
Right.
And so if something else is doing the heavy lifting and learning, then our ability to do that, it takes away our agency from ourselves. We do run that risk in that way, and so that's something I think about.
Thank you. Liz, any final thoughts?
What I will say is my hope it really is that it would help us slow down, right? And what I mean by that is that it will prompt the understanding again to develop critical thinking skills, information literacy, media literacy, because what we're seeing more and more is just the spread of misinformation and how quickly it can happen through digital tools. So hopefully it would force us to go back, right, to the cassette tapes, right, to the pen and pencil, and spend time honing, some of those classical skills, right, of thinking critically and gaining that information for ourselves and not relying on machines to provide it for us, right? That is always curated and filtered in particular ways. We can do our own homework. So I think that would be my hope as this continues.
That's a wonderful way to bring this all together and wrap this up. That would be my hope as well. Gentlemen, as we wrap up today's discussion, I want to extend my deepest thanks to both of you. That was incredibly substantive and stimulating. Your insights and perspectives have shed light on the complex ways AI intersects with our faith, our spirituality, and daily lives. Thank you for sharing your wisdom so openly and thoughtfully. And thank you to our viewers. Thank you for joining us and engaging with us on this important discussion. Your curiosity and willingness to explore these questions are what makes this dialogue meaningful. We hope today's conversation leaves you reflecting, questioning, and imagining the possibilities that technology and spirituality bring together. Until next time, from all of us here at Sanctuary, thank you, stay thoughtful, and take care.